Welcome, Left Reckoning patrons, to another premium edition of our material here. With me, as always, David GRISCOM. Hello, David.
How's it going, brother?
It's going well. And joining us today is one of my favorite authors and sort of right-wing watchers. That's that phrase. I keep using that, and I don't really like it. But Corey Pein, author of Live, Work, 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 Die. Great book on Silicon Valley, where you say you don't really go undercover of Silicon Valley, but it's sort of, how do you describe it, Corey?
A madcap misadventure. I saw some reviewers described it as sort of an anthropological look. I did go not undercover, but sort of mingled, fly on the wall style in Silicon Valley for 6 or 8 months or so, and to get material. So anthropological is a good word, I guess.
Yeah, and we'll circle back to some of that when we get to one of our favorite topics of Peter Thiel. But before we do, the sort of occasion for this is I've been getting in hot water with part of our audience because I have a dismissive attitude towards UFOs. Now, I will put this into two contexts for me that explain this. One is it's sort of a God that failed. For me, I was a big X-Files fan growing up in the 2000s, literally to the point of when we first got internet, I went to FBI.gov or whatever and tried to look for the X-Files section, see if I could maybe get like a young recruits section. I loved it. I loved like the Sci-Fi Channel, all that stuff. And then I got into, and where my current sort of like James Randi challenge to the UFO community is the skeptic community, which is led me to this, my current position now, which is like, I want to see this stuff get registered outside of, these official military channels. And until it does, I'm not super interested. However, that has kind of kept me where I am for the last like 10 years or so, I guess. There's a lot of buzz about this now, and there is one person I trust to give us the lowdown on what people should be looking out for, and that is Corey. So, Corey, with that sort of introduction, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of anticipation about this report that came out in late June. It was requested by Congress, and it was overseen by the Director of National Intelligence, or their office, which is pretty much the highest intelligence agency in the U.S. government. And if you read the unclassified version is only like 9 pages or something like that. And, there's not a big clear headline to come out of it, except I would say that, it's the assessment of the U.S. government that UFOs that appear to defy the laws of physics are a real phenomenon and need more investigation. So, how people react to that news is all over the map. I think it's pretty significant finding, and I think that there's potential for scientific advances of a breakthrough and really necessary at this time in our society's relationship with the planet at this time. I think it's something important to look at. So that's my quick take.
On the optimist side, or the pro sort of technology side, I do get people that ask me like, yeah, why would aliens even be interested in coming to us? And to me, it's like, well, if as long as we're entertaining sort of this sort of stuff, the idea that they would have some awareness of like, oh, these motherfuckers are cooking their planet. Maybe we should do some sort of intervention and technology share. Like, I actually like that argument isn't good for me. To me, like, I guess my question is like, when we think about the realm of possibility here, like to me, when I see a lot of these videos, they strike me as a lot of the stuff I saw growing up, which purported to be UFOs, but it was like, a tracking of a weather balloon across like a gimbal mounted camera, and there's a fast moving background. Like the videos don't really do it for me, I guess. And because I guess the other thing that seems possible is that there's some sort of aerial phenomenon, like a solar flare type situation or something like that, that's what these things are registering. Is that too simplistic for the kind of what we know of what they're looking at to like for it to be like weather balloons or some sort of magnetic high atmosphere stuff, or does this seem to be like control? Because and the other thing I just want to throw out there is I remember like 5 years ago there was this hypersonic flight experiments going on with the U.S. government, and they lost track of something going like 13,000 miles an hour or something like that. I don't know if you recall that, but like this is the realm, I guess. Like, I'm just curious what you think this might point to, even if it's like a 5% chance.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on which cases we're talking about. I mean, I think, as far as I know, the most interesting and clear videos haven't yet been declassified. So the videos that have come out, I agree, in some ways they're a bit underwhelming. But the cases that were examined in this report, I think there was something like 144 cases that they looked at since 2004, all involving, U.S. government employees and equipment. And I think 80 of those were tracked on multiple sensors. So it's not just, whatever cockpit videos we've seen. It's the fact that multiple radar and other sensors are tracking these things. So we know that they're and those systems have been checked. So, malfunctions are possible in some cases, but when you've got multiple sensors, they all have to be failing in the same way somehow to track these things. If you assume that they're not there. So I think, the thing is, they're there. It just becomes a question of what is it? And the report never mentions aliens. I think I have some of my notes from it here. They had 5 categories, and I think these are reasonable categories that they put the things into. One was airborne clutter. Another was natural atmospheric phenomena. Another was U.S. government or industry developmental programs, which would, I guess, be America's own secret stuff.
Right. Another was
foreign adversary systems and what they called a catch-all other bin. And I guess that would be your aliens.
Right.
So I think, from the variety of weird things that people see in the sky, those are reasonable categories to put it into. The ones that everybody wants to know about are the other, which, I'm not sure. I think people, looking in good faith, I think have examined those edge cases pretty closely and just haven't been able to come up with an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the spectrum of possibility, I think we should consider that it's some sort of intelligent, non-human intelligence operating these things, but it could be, some physical phenomenon that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
Because it's not just like they're going really fast. I mean, they go fast, they stop on a dime, they go down through the water, they come back up from the water. They do things that just shouldn't be possible. And again, those are not the majority of cases, but they're enough that this is, this issue has become public to this point. So
yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I wonder the two sort of case studies. One is ball lightning, which I always have kind of looked into, and like as a phenomenon that people aren't really sure they can confirm it, but there's a lot of stories about it. And like maybe it occurred to me like maybe this is some sort of activity of that, but you seem to think there's some intelligent control indicated in like the patterns of movement. The other thing that it brings to mind is I have family members who found out later that they were working on parts for the stealth bomber,
right.
And they had no idea at the time. They were just like they had like one kind of component that they made in isolation of everything else, and that seems to me like that if there's a lot of stuff coming out, I mean. It'd be nice, I guess. I would love it if it's ours.
So,
I don't know.
I'm not a big fan of this theory that you're proposing because I think it just substitutes one conspiracy theory for another.
Okay.
Because if you want to believe it's U.S. government stuff, you have to believe that this whole report and all the hubbub is just some kind of psychological operation to confuse us. Mm-hmm. It'd be a weird way to do it. For one, to announce that you have a vulnerability to your most advanced military hardware that can't keep up with these things and are constantly being buzzed by them. I mean, it's just weird to announce a vulnerability like that without coming out right afterward and saying, okay, here's our fix for it. Mm-hmm. But I actually, if you read between the lines in the report, while the National Intelligence Office was able to get information from pretty much every agency and every part of the military, the Air Force was not very forthcoming with information. And this has been something that even the U.S. Navy pilots whose encounters in 2004 became famous a few years ago, were talking about is that Air Force personnel came on their ship and confiscated their logs. So I think there's actually, if reading between the lines of this report and just with all the other evidence that's out there, it is possible that maybe some part of the U.S. government has technology, or a contractor perhaps has technology that the rest of the government, for whatever reason, isn't privy to. So you can't rule it out. I mean, the report doesn't rule it out necessarily. I think however, if that's what's actually going on here, just speaking as a journalist, I think it's a huge scandal that we need to know more about, because these things have been buzzing, among other things, they've been buzzing U.S. military aircraft. So that seems like a pretty reckless way to behave if it's some other part of the U.S. government, that has this stuff.
I mean, if you ever spent time with people in the Air Force or the Navy, there is like a big rivalry. No, I agree.
Or if it's like Eric Prince or something has got some sort of his hands on something and he's like, that would be another concern I have. Or the other thing is, I thought it like maybe China's got something or something, right?
I mean, again, I think it would be a weird way for them to demonstrate this technology. I mean, Putin has apparently in Russia made some advances in hypersonic tech, and they haven't been shy about demonstrating it or bragging about it. Sure. So, I mean, if it's a secret program, whether the U.S. or some other country, I mean, I think it's important that we find out what's actually going on and bring it to light. Because for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, there's sort of a military security angle to it. Like, if the U.S. doesn't have air superiority over its own airspace, I mean, who does? That's a question. And if this technology is as miraculous as the, now verified accounts sort of suggest, then what solutions to the energy crisis might be out there, already developed that we don't have access to? I mean, what is the political sort of ramifications of that kind of secrecy?
Yeah.
So,
that's a good point, because like you said, like if this is the government doing it as an elaborate psyop, which like I still think we invented a vulnerability and we need to spend more money, right? Like then that is, like you said, like that's a huge story and something that we need to get to the bottom of and follow through on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, though. I don't necessarily trust the government or the military to do all of this. But one good thing that's come out of the report is they say, we need to get more of the civilian scientific community engaged in this. And, that's going to probably require more government spending. But the government spends money on all kinds of ridiculous stuff. I don't think this is that ridiculous, especially when you consider the consequences. So.
And it also strikes me that it might have just secondary effects of like, we have all this space junk floating around that like people like Elon Musk are positioning themselves to as like part of the problem, but also the solutions to like space litter, basically all this, which this comes from me listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast a little bit too often, but like we have too much junk already just in orbit. And it's becoming a liability. And maybe we can dual purpose, look out for UFOs. And I don't know. There's some benefit to that too. But anything else you guys want to say on topic of UFOs before we bring it back down to Earth?
Nothing, David? Really? Come on.
I mean, for me, I sit on the sidelines and I let you guys debate this one out because, I mean, I'm obviously interested in it. In a general sense, but for me, my eyes roll over when I see most of these reports come out, and it's just because I've been so poisoned, I think, by the media at this point. Like every documentary on Netflix is some like true alien story, and like so whenever I see anything new come out, I immediatally just look the other way. I guess I just sort of train myself. What?
It's a cry wolf problem, basically.
I'm disappointed. I'm like you. I'm disappointed with kind of all the media that's out there about this. So, I mean, my next book proposal is supposed to be on this topic. So, hopefully, I can be a corrective there in some ways. But there's just a lot of trash.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating.
What's that?
No, I was just saying it's absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to watch those documentaries just like the next person too. But it's just like I treat it as like fantasy. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a reason for that too, in all honesty.
It's pretty interesting because this is an area where the government simultaneously seems to be saying, like, you need to pay attention to this, folks, and also there's nothing to see here.
Yeah.
So there's mixed messages coming out. I think the skeptic community is not necessarily covering itself in glory these past few years in the way it's approached this issue. I think that they've relied on a lot of sort of arguments and sort of knee-jerk responses left over from the 90s and haven't really engaged with the new information that's come out.
I think that's a problem with the skeptic community generally, to be honest. I think their arguments on the JFK assassination are all basically like Vincent Bugliosi, Dealey Plaza minutia about technicalities and trajectories and stuff like that, and just zero like interest in getting into like CIA connections or state connections or organized crime and stuff like that. Just incurious. And I feel like I could come up with another example of them, and there's a version to this sort of like outside of technical debunking, like there's a comfort in having something debunked. We see this all the time, like the right wing will try to like say debunk this or that, right? Like debunked means you can relax about something, and like a little bit of psychological discomfort can be alleviated because you heard somebody else say, no, that's not, just don't worry about that. And I think that is probably why I gravitated from the skeptic atheist sort of community to more like a leftist Marxist one, to be honest.
I think that, I agree with everything you just said. I used to be on the sort of edges of that sort of skeptic community and watched it turn more and more reactionary. I think if you accept that there's maybe government or industry disinformation efforts on the UFOs are real side, there's also similar efforts on the they're not real side. So
yeah.
For some reason, there's certain topics like this that it does seem like there are impediments erected to finding out the truth in a very systematic way. And you wonder why that is. I mean, the simplest explanation is that the government does have secret programs, advanced aerial technology, among other things, that it wants to keep secret. So anything that's in the sky and unexplained, are difficult to explain or just looks different than everything else is maybe exposure of that is maybe a threat of exposing some other program off to the side they've got, just by virtue of them being aerial phenomena. So,
but I mean, while we're on this, because I mean, I think you make a really good point about how the if the government is trying to cover up their abilities to do things, they're doing they're doing a funny job of it. But could you just, like, in your mind, what is the upside for the government in sort of suppressing information that we have contact or like regular, if not contact, but just like regular footage of like UFOs visiting the planet?
Well, that's the weird thing, is because when that New York Times story came out in 2017 and revealed they had this secret program, I mean, part of the thing that made that story so big was the fact that it implied that there has been a cover-up previous, to this disclosure. And this report that came out in June does the same thing. I mean, it suggests that there was a cover-up. So apart from wanting to keep secret tech secret, I mean, it's open to speculation why they would do that. I mean, one thing that the guy that ran that program, Lou Elizondo, has said is that there is, and it fits with previous research that's been done on, by UFO people, is that there is something like a network of essentially like evangelical Christians in the military establishment who think that whatever these things are, or if it represents some alien intelligence, are demonic. So they're coming at it from a religious point of view. I think that in some ways the bigger stakes of this debate and this story are sort of the same as have plagued scientific leaps through time, which is the idea that is humanity the center of the universe. And I think our science still does place humanity at the center in a lot of ways that we sort of take for granted. And this story threatens that. So I think that's part of the institutional inertia against it too, apart from the idea that maybe there's like a Christian cabal
that is
suppressing information.
That's so fascinating. Like a bunch of Christians up in high levels of government thinking like, damn, we got some serious demons flying around.
Or
God
it's
bless
just like
America,
the Admiral from Twin Peaks, right? No, but I mean, obviously they're not as cool as that character. I mean, you can only have a military official in fiction as cool as that guy. But at the same point, I mean, I think like, especially if we are operating from like the idea that like, okay, UFOs exist and people know about it. I do think that what we've seen is a quite frightening example of the U.S. military supremacy over civilian government. Because I honestly I let's say if alien like the military does have good intelligence that aliens exist and they're visiting their planet regularly. I don't think they told Trump. Right? I mean, like I really doubt that they told Trump.
Yeah, I doubt that they would have too. I mean,
Trump spoke and he's like, yeah, I don't really.
I mean, like, obviously Trump sucks, but like, he's the president, and like, I really can imagine a scenario where they wouldn't tell him information like that.
Well, imagine if he was the one who was supposed to come out and say, "Hey, this is all real." Like nobody would believe it.
Yeah. I've seen them
with good reason.
Look, these guys, they're like 8 feet tall. They fly around. Like, you can't believe. Well, let's move to some Trumpy topics before we let you go, Corey. I read this big long story in BuzzFeed about the Whitmer kidnapping and all of the informants, a dozen informants involved in that, and sort of coaxing along. And obviously, the left is not unfamiliar with this sort of pattern. At Dakota Access Pipeline, an informant basically planted a gun on Red Fawn Fallis that sent her to prison for years, I think 4 years. And I'm curious what your take is on that story in general, but also like I want to take the right in sort of two levels here. One is this sort of like militia, right wing, the type of folks who storm the Capitol type level. And then also I think from my perspective, a little bit more interesting is like the Thiel, and anybody who is like the high level at coaxing that out. Obviously, Trump was clearly coaxing the January 6th down. But give me your take on this Whitmer kidnapping story, the feds, and how we should be thinking of this sort of thing. Because I do think like I think there is simultaneously like what happened on the 6th surprised a lot of people who I think were poo-pooing the threat from these sorts of types. But I also think like the subsequent reporting on these informants and just like I said, like the pattern of entrapment that we all recognize from the War on Terror, these are difficult things to balance.
So my take on the BuzzFeed story is that it did a pretty good job of presenting what I assume is the defense case for the people who are implicated in that kidnapping plot. I'm not sure that it proved entrapment. I'm not a lawyer. My understanding is it's pretty hard to actually prove entrapment in court. I think the standard is that you have to basically prove that the crime wouldn't have happened without the government.
Right.
And, that's pretty hard to say. I mean, even if you read the story, that apart from what it leaves out, it's pretty clear that the people who weren't informants were keen. I think there was one guy in the story who sort of got cold feet as the informant kind of egged things on, or one of the informants was egging things on to get more serious. But that doesn't mean the rest of the defendants felt that way. And of course, his lawyer's going to say that. So, right. I mean, we know that the FBI operates this way. There was just another case yesterday I saw, I forget the location, but it was an Army veteran who was apparently planning a terrorist attack and got his bombs from the FBI, and they turned out to be duds. But, if you read the rest of that account, it was like the guy probably would have done something else if they hadn't sold him those bombs. So, I'm not super sympathetic with law enforcement in most cases, or even necessarily in this case, but I also know from my own reporting that these, right-wing extremist groups are real and they really do plan violence. And, the FBI does what it thinks is best to bring these cases to court. And, it sounds like in the Michigan case, there was a problem with one of the agents too. He seems like real loose cannon, and I think was threatening his wife or something like that. I mean, again, not too uncommon for cops. So, I'm not sure how much we can extrapolate from the one report. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in court. But again, I'm not sure that it proves that it was entrapment.
Yeah, I think it just kind of reinforces the thing that any sort of activist should be aware of when it comes to somebody who enters into a scene and starts implying heightening, and doing riskier actions. David, what do you have to say?
Oh, I mean, in terms of infiltration of agents, I mean, I remember being in DC, I sort of cut my teeth on the left and Occupy, and they're 100%. Were agitators there trying to get people to get into stuff. And you saw it even more clearly at J20, which was, the protest before Donald Trump's inauguration, where all of these people were showing up at these protests were at the planning meetings. They were DC police officers and FBI agents, and they were trying to encourage people what if we, put pipe bombs here? Or what if we put chains here? And it's a really frightening, reality. I guess for me, it was frightening because I was in DC and I was a part of J20, protests, to just realize that Jesus Christ, you're in the same room as these people, right? And that, it is not just, fantastical to think that they do care, in the sense that they want to show up and they want to, entrap, activists into, heightening, activities and stuff like that, so that you can, have the excuse to come in and throw people in prison.
Yeah. Go ahead, Corey.
I was going to say, I think we should have some way of limiting that kind of law enforcement conduct, because they certainly don't just do it to the right. They definitely do it to the left too.
Yeah, I had a stat that was from that article, but 41 million a year spent to informants for basically material assistance to help them do their stuff. That
they spend a lot of time too on these cases, typically, right?
And
I mean, they entrench themselves in a community for years at a time.
Right, and that's the and I'm a little bit tangential, but Black Klansman, these sorts of movies, I do understand the fear that we're trying to I don't know, I'm of two minds, because I remember being in the UK when Anders Breivik did his killing in Norway, I believe. And that was nuts, because he sets off bombs in the city and then goes and drives to some, if I remember right, some sort of liberal or progressive sort of camp and kills a bunch of kids. And I absolutely think that with the amount of there's raw material here, Catherine Ballou, is that her name, that follows the right, sort of how the right feeds on returning soldiers from theaters of war and stuff like that. We have the raw material for that stuff there, and I absolutely worry about attacks like that. And then I also I have the war on terror, domestic sort of worry that to put it bluntly, that it's when the way that the FBI basically led Muslims to doing things so they could arrest them for the PR value of it, right?
In general, I'm still much more concerned with, law enforcement and, the authorities cooperating with, far-right violent groups than I am with them busting them, just in general. I mean, I'm all for civil liberties and, good police work and good conduct by the police. But in general, I'm still more worried about the cooperation with right-wing paramilitaries. And we still don't know the full picture of that on January 6th. We don't even know the full picture of it in in the Michigan case.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, forget this kidnapping plot and the informants. I mean, what about when they shut down the Capitol and they just let people march around with their guns and stuff? I mean, that was crazy. And like, that was kind of like law enforcement cooperation with, an anti-government event. So we've got to keep our eye on that. I think that's really the bigger threat.
That's a really key point. And that's the thing that I thought was the important thing to emphasize right after January 6th is like, how was this allowed to happen? Right. And like investigating that like is way more interesting to me than investigating and like the like different sort of groups who would have been there in a more organized fashion than any rube that like, got swept up in a march. Let's move to a little bit.
Can I just say before we move on, I want to say that in the case of Portland, Oregon, I mean, what we saw there was really the police sort of using the right-wing street groups as kind of a force multiplier against protesters. And I know that similar things played out in other parts of the country. And I think it's going to be decades before we actually figure out the level of cooperation with the police that was going on there. Yeah. So, that I think is much more concerning when you think about the potential for widespread violence and the potential for these right-wing extremist groups to carry out attacks on their political opponents, with the government turning a blind eye or even encouraging it. Mm-hmm. So, there's cases that haven't been brought to court yet that may never be, where these informants are used basically to beat up people the cops don't like. Right. And that's really dangerous, and I don't think we see enough people talking about it.
I agree with that. Yeah.
In Portland too, I mean, just as an outsider, I don't think a lot of people have reckoned with how serious those street battles were. I mean, it was, I can't imagine somebody being, having experienced that, but like, to know that, you have, this kind of collusion essentially going on is really frightening. And I guess like for me, these kind of questions, they always go back to like politics in general, in the sense of like, okay, how can we do something about it? And I do think, I know we want to move on, so I might just make this point here. No, go for it. I think what really, it all is frightening, right? But one aspect of it that really does, give me pause is that in a lot of ways, law enforcement and the FBI over the past couple of years have really shown themselves to be rogue. And what I mean by that is that like, I am sitting here right now and I'm trying to think, how can we put pressure and fight back against these systems? And it's hard to even know where to begin on that, right? Because in a lot of ways on the federal level, I really do think that they're sort of operating under their own playbook, right? And at the local level, like certainly we've seen Portland, New York, all of these examples over the uprisings in 2020, where the police departments are basically warring like publicly with the elected civilian government. And I don't think that we wrestle with that question enough. It's just sort of like figuring out how to like build that political power to deal with the people with guns driving through your neighborhood. It's really horrifying. And here they're doing it again in Austin. The police department, which has had, a local government that's basically tried to push back against police power, push back against police funding. And they're highly involved in a lot of these shadow political groups. The police department are highly involved in all of these shadow groups right now. They're trying to subvert the will when people voted to defund the police here. They're highly involved behind the scenes with a lot of operators who are literally out there right now campaigning on a public ballot that will force the city to increase police budgets here, and they're actually out there lying right now. So they're paying people like $10 an hour who they find who don't who need funds basically, and they say like, here, just say whatever you want to people about the police and just get them to sign this petition here, right? And it's been exposed, these connections, right? And I'm just saying like, rogue element too, from just like the spying and the killing and all that kind of stuff, but also political activities. Like, I don't know, I know y'all are tuned into this stuff, but it's like, it's something that like we really have to be wrestling with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just like that police department that put out the video about the guy overdosing on fentanyl, and they just think that they can get away with lying about like that sort of stuff. That's clearly like, those are rogue and like dangerous and dumb. And
in New York City, they doxed the mayor's daughter. That was an insane example of how confident they feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, in Portland, they leaked information suggesting that a city councilor, black city councilor who had expressed, and been very critical of the police department, leaked some information that turned out to be wrong that said she was involved in a hit and run accident. And apparently this just came out in the last week. It takes months for this stuff to come out over time, but
Right.
Apparently they sent officers to her house, and she said they planned on doing a perp walk for her in front of the cameras, which, I mean, it's not the first time Portland cops have done something like that or tried to stage something like that. And they do get mixed up. Urban departments all over the country do get mixed up in politics in that way. And it's something I think that most savvy politicians are aware of, and it's part of the reason they don't, try to go after police budgets, among other things.
Yeah, damn. Well, on that note, that horrifying, looming, ominous note, let's go to Peter Thiel, our buddy Peter Thiel. He's running 2 candidates for office, JD Vance, and I was looking for my notes because I wrote the other one down, but he's got less traction in my imagination. Do you remember the other guy's name off the top of your head?
I don't. I was hoping you would.
Damn, I have. Okay, I literally just looked this up, but what's your take on what Thiel's doing? Give people maybe a little bit of a refresher who Peter Thiel is, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, the levels of like organized reaction, what they're up to these days.
Peter Thiel is the far-right venture capitalist. He's on the board of Facebook. He co-founded PayPal. He's multi-billionaire, and he's been getting more and more involved in politics, starting in 2016 with the Trump campaign and his appearance at the Republican National Convention. And now, as Matt said, he's bankrolling, I don't know if it's just 2 or more than 2 candidates around the country in this congressional election cycle.
I think it's Vance and Blake Masters is the other guy.
Okay, good Nazi sounding name there, Blake Masters. And the people he's supporting do seem to have a more fascist bent than your, I guess, pre-Trump Republican, standard issue Republican. I don't think that he's backing any never Trumpers or anything like that. He seems to be
Well, I mean, Vance had been a never Trumper at one point, but he's deleting those tweets now.
It seems. Oh, right. Well, it seems like they're aligning around this new kind of like nationalist Tucker Carlson line. He's certainly promoting it. He promotes Vance and all this talk about family, and comes really close to repeating the 14 words about perpetuating the people, or however they frame it. Yeah, the folk, the Volk. Yeah, and that's totally in Thiel's wheelhouse. I mean, he was mixed up. I wrote about it in my book. Mixed up with this group of internet weirdos called the neo-reactionaries, who had a similar sort of approach, although it was more about dissolving the state and promoting corporate rule. I think that's totally compatible with the way JD Vance looks at things. Blake Masters, I don't know as much about.
Mm-hmm. But Thiel, that's who Thiel would have been, thinking of when he's, opining on it was a bad idea that we gave women suffrage because of the knock-on effects of that. That's where he's getting that shit from, right?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the extent to which Thiel is involved in shaping talking points. I think sort of like a venture capitalist, which he is. He likes to spread his money around, and when he sees something that might take off, he goes for it. So I think that's probably how he approaches his political donations as well.
And what's your sense of Palantir? So my understanding is it basically got sort of state money or intelligence, maybe even CIA money to start up with. It's basically like a giant search nexus for spying on people, right?
Yeah, as I understand it, it's a database of databases. It tries to link all these different sources of information together and basically make it easy to track people and whatever else they want to track. And I think it's a pretty scary company. I don't understand why somebody who is so extreme in their views and has bankrolled essentially neo-Nazi bloggers has a security clearance and is allowed to, get that deeply involved with the military and intelligence establishment. Except, there's people that agree with him that are already in that establishment. So that's the problem.
That's what, and it bugs me, this posture that these guys are like. It's like they're trying to save the CIA from being run by the cat ladies, right? Like, and I don't know, like this, like basically, isn't that like, I don't know. It bugs me.
I mean, the phenomenon is sort of strange with Vance in particular, right? Because like I get like Vance odious, character, no doubt about it. But I've been trying to figure out like the strategy behind Thiel's like real gunning for him. And I wonder, I mean, maybe it's just that he owns him essentially. But, a lot of stuff that Vance says is like pretty horrific, but typical, Republican stuff. At least what I've seen from him is like, oh, there's, lost sense of family values, work ethic, this kind of thing. I mean, I can see everything around Vance as being like very sinister. But I keep coming back to this question. It's like, why JD Vance? Because as a candidate, he doesn't impress me too much. He's not very eloquent. He's not the first guy to come up with a story that says, I'm from the real working class America and represent some kind of new right formation. It is a puzzle a little bit.
I think it has to do with his willingness to sort of act like that working class spokesman and to carry the talking points forward in a way that blunts the left's appeal. I mean, I think a lot of it is about, pretty systematically looking at what works for the left and trying to co-opt it and steal it and turn it into something.
Yeah, it seems too geared to that to actually win an election, right? Like
maybe. I mean, I don't know much about, the politics of the state where Vance is. And maybe this might be exactly
Ohio. Wrong, but like I there's this political piece that kind of goes with the sense that I've been getting. The Beltway can't stop talking about him. The voters he needs barely know him. The conversation with Ohio voters. Yeah, like and I think it's a kind of crowded field, is my understanding too. Like I think this might be a bad investment in Thiel's, but I think it does, like it is very keyed in with attacking the left. Honestly, I think more than winning an election, which is like, because he like the shit he says about AOC and Buttigieg being cat people, like that's bait to me. And that's not particularly like useful bait. I don't understand that being useful bait for running in a primary election.
It seems to just be what they get off on, though. And isn't that really sort of a common theme on the right nowadays? Is that it, like, triggering the libs and that kind of stuff? It seems to be a unifying thing on the right. Is like, attack the left, trigger the libs, and doing it for fun. I mean, they're doing it for fun, their own enjoyment.
On that sense, I just worry, like, you're not going to be able to do that like Trump did. Like, except no imitators. Like that.
JD Vance doesn't have that skill.
Exactly.
I saw somebody on Twitter yesterday, I think it was, point out that like whenever JD Vance tries to, he's really trying to get his culture war licks in, but nobody seems to care that much.
Yeah.
The cat lady comment was an example of that. It's just not landing very well.
Like,
so
you wrote a book, you nerd. I was on TV for years doing like funny stuff to like B-list celebrities, and JD Vance wrote some like condescending book that like only liberals liked. Like, I don't think was the right big on hillbilly elegy. I don't really think so.
It
was like New York liberals for the most part.
Yeah, that was what was really offensive about it, I thought, too, and now I think now that JD Vance is speaking more like, a cornpone neo-Nazi, I think a lot of the liberals they're keeping their distance from him, but I'm still mad about how many of them sort of embraced him early in his career as some kind of, white working class whisperer or something.
Honestly, man, that just sucks so bad.
Searching that those people do drives me crazy. I'm just saying, like, as somebody from a red state, you know what I mean? Like there are plenty of people you can talk to from all these parts of the country to get a sense of it, and they just refuse. They're like, who is the person who is literally closest to me, as possible geographically? Oh, that's going to be, the real whisperer of like this class of people. It's what I mean. Like, JD Vance was getting sort of roasted on Twitter recently too for asking where's a safe place to stay in New York City. Which he had been there regularly. Like people were pointing out, like you have been here like 4 times in the last year.
I saw somebody suggest the Yale Club,
Right.
which is kind of, I mean,
but I mean, I do want to just sort of, entertain this thought for a second. I will believe that this is a threat once I start seeing like JD Vance fans in the wild, like people who are like might be into him as a candidate and less as a working class whisperer. But it can be. We've seen that like you don't have to win elections to create movements, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang is another great example of somebody who brought around a kind of dissatisfied like young people into some whatever the hell he's trying to sell, right? Tulsi Gabbard in a more tragic way too. I mean, like there are all these people who like, these aren't the movements that are shaping, and Bernie Sanders, maybe you can separate that from them, but like, this isn't like redefining American society, but it puts people in a camp, right? And it might be worth to get a Vance if Vance was a hit. And I think the problem is that more and more I feel like he was just a bad investment. But I feel like if I were trying to think of the strategy of Thiel and all these people, it's like you can get somebody, and even if you don't think they're going to win necessarily the position that you're trying to put them up for, they can draw people into a certain way of thinking and whatnot. But I just don't think that Vance
I don't think he cares that much if Vance fails. I mean, as a VC, he's used to like 90% of his investments not bearing a profit at all. So I don't think he really cares. And as far as buying toadies and buying loyalties, for probably their whole political life, it's pretty cheap investment too. So if he ever does make something of himself.
That's a great point. Yeah. It's long game for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it. Corey, thank you so much. People, if you haven't checked it out, Live, Work, Die. Didn't put too many works on there, did I?
No, it's 3 works.
All right. And I thought I might have did it 4 accidentally. And News from Nowhere podcast. Remind me the provenance of that name again. It's an old socialist, right?
It is an old socialist text from the 19th century.
Yeah, by whom?
Fuck. I want to say Upton Sinclair, but I might be wrong.
No, I think you're wrong.
It's been so while since I looked.
Let's do this.
Let alone read it.
It's not William Morris either.
Are you sure it's not William Morris?
Oh, it is William Morris. Okay, yeah, it is William Morris. There you go. Yeah, William Morris, very interesting guy. I would love to get some William Morris wallpaper up in this behind me, but I just can't. That stuff's expensive. Anyway, Corey Pein, thank you so much, man. Good talking with you.
Good to be back. Or actually, is this my first time on Left Right? Anyway, it's good to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.
We'll have to have you back when you have that next book a little bit closer. Revisit some of these topics.
Yeah, my agent will be happy when that happens. It's been a while now.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Thank you.